Good morning, friends, and welcome to our weekly meeting of the United Lodge of Theosophists here in the Washington, D.C. area. Theosophy, this wisdom religion, has been passed on from age to age. The essence of what we know as philosophy, science, and religion flows back through Theosophy, but the real meaning of the wisdom of the ages often gets adulterated under preconceived ideas, prejudice, and dogma. As suggested in our declaration, which is here on the back of our program, United Lodges of Theosophy throughout the world aim to make available the fundamental principles, including the one life from which all springs and which makes universal brotherhood a fact in nature. It points to the timeless foundation for right ethics and right intellectual development, which leads to right discrimination in our actions so that they benefit all and harm none. These principles show that we never were not, nor shall we ever not be. We appear in the body from time to time with the opportunity, whether we know it or not, to aid in the preservation of the just, the destruction of wickedness, and the establishment of righteousness. To the extent that we honestly endeavor to understand and properly carry out our purpose for being embodied, to that extent do we advance toward perfection and toward eventual remembering our past lives. We are here to aid in great nature's role, great nature's sole cause, which is to provide the opportunity for all to become gods. And we really are gods now, we just don't know it. As humans, we establish our own karma to the extent that we aid great nature or work against its cause. The Washington, D.C. area ULT is one of a number of ULTs throughout the world that are carrying on in the endeavor to make the unadulterated philosophy of Theosophy available to all. It meets every Sunday at 11 a.m. here at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Suite 230 in Bethesda, Maryland, for what is usually a presentation by a student followed by a question and answer period. On the first and third Sundays of the month at 12:30 p.m., there are studies and discussions on selected topics. All are encouraged to join us for these activities and participate to the extent that you pledge yourself to do so. If you can't join us in person, please join us via YouTube or on our website, which is www.ultwashdc.org. So we can be contacted at email at ultwashdc.org or by phone 301-656-3566. Today's talk is on psychic and spiritual man. And next week, this coming Saturday, really, over in our Philadelphia Lodge at 1917 Walnut Street in Philadelphia, there is a special program, starting at 11 o'clock on moral decisions. And the agenda is here. It's a theosophical approach to everyday ethics. Why be good? Why can't I just live for pleasure? Can we do better than the golden rule? Is it wrong to get as much money and power as I can? What are my obligations to the poor and the weak? Must I always tell the truth? These are soul-searching questions that we will be delving into Saturday at 11 o'clock, and we hope that you can join us if at all possible. And it lasts until 4:30. And now for today's talk. which is on psychic and spiritual man. Oh, yeah, the reading too.
Before today's talk, we have a reading from Patanjali's Yoga Aphorisms. This is from Book 2, titled The Essential Nature of Isolation. Perfection of body or superhuman powers are produced by birth, or by powerful herbs, or by incantations, penances, or meditations. The sole cause of permanent perfections is meditation performed in incarnations prior to that in which the perfection appears. For perfection by birth, such as the power of birds to fly, is impermanent, as also are those following upon incantations, elixirs, and the like. But as meditation reaches within, it affects each incarnation. It must also follow that evil meditation will have the result of begetting perfection in evil. Aphorism 2. The change of a man into another class of being, such as that of a celestial being, is effected by the transfusion of natures. Now this alludes to the possibility admitted by the Hindus of a man being altered into one of the Divas, or celestial beings, through the force of penance and meditation. 3. Certain merits, works, and practices are called occasional because they do not produce essential modifications of nature, but they are effective for the removal of obstructions in the way of former merit, as in the case of the husbandman who removes impediments in the course of the irrigating stream, which then flows forward. Now this is intended to further explain Aphorism 2 by showing that in any incarnation, certain practices, e.g., those previously laid down, will clear away the obscurations of a man's past karma, upon which that karma will manifest itself, whereas if the practices were not pursued, the result of the past meditation might be delayed until yet another life. 4. The mind acting in the various bodies which the aesthetic voluntarily assumes are the production of his egoism alone.
Good morning and welcome everyone. Today's topic is psychic and spiritual man. We have talked quite a bit on separate occasions about this topic, but today we're going to put the principles together to see how the transformation or transmutation that was referred to in Patanjali's Yoga Aphorisms can be brought about for each human being by their own individual effort. In the Theosophical literature and the Secret Doctrine and all of the other discussions, man is divided into two parts: the permanent and the non-permanent. And around this, all the principles are gathered. What are the permanent in us? This is referred to as Atma, Buddhi, Manas. Atman, spirit; Buddhi, spiritual discrimination; and Manas being the mind. So this is the permanent part that goes from life to life to life to life. It is immortal. So this permanent is immortal. What about the non-permanent? These are the principles that drop off at the end of each earth life. And we list them from the top coming down, karma. And really this is karma manas, because at this stage of our development, karma and manas are kind of co-joined. They work together. The intellectual mind and desires work together. Intellectual. Right. And then comes our astral. Then we have Jiva, which is the life principle, and of course our physical body. Now, when you look at this, it is a partition that enables a student of Theosophy to understand what he is made up of. And when you look at the list, which is the part that is visible? Only the physical body is visible. All the rest is invisible. Only this is visible. And all the rest, including subjective and objective, is invisible. It is very important to remember that we're not the physical body. Everything is in it, but we are not it. We're not the physical body. So each one of these levels then correlates to a level of consciousness. And that level of consciousness correlates in the cosmos to a plane. A plane. So we need to be cognizant that our waking consciousness is here on earth, but the others also have a plane. We're up and down depending where this principle takes us. And in the discussion today, we're going to see how this influences the being called man. Now, HPB in the Secret Doctrine tells us that this arrangement was made to give us an understanding of our principles, which to this student it says that there's a lot more to man than just these principles suggest, because that interplay between the lower and higher is on a continuum, and depending in which direction we're being pulled, either to the divine or to the earthly, this then has significance. And we're told in the introductory that the whole of this knowledge is in the safekeeping of the initiates, the adepts, mahatmas, or the perfected men. And that their intention was not to keep it away, because this is the life-giving force. This knowledge is the life-giving force. It was not their intention to keep it away from humanity. It was just that humanity was unfit to receive it. And for many ages, it was not given. And the danger, she explains, she says, because it would have been just like giving a child a lighted candle in a explosive situation where they could blow themselves and everything around them up. So they warn us. Why is this so? Well, when you look at the subjective aspect of us, Atma Buddhi Manas, which is the permanent aspect, and it goes from life to life, it stands to reason. Those are subjective levels of consciousness, and it relates to our not being in a body as well as being in a body. Our consciousness, when we are relating to Atma Buddhi Manas, is not of earth. Obvious, is it not? Because it's a spiritual. It's not earthly. So in order to understand what happens to us in those subjective conditions, we need to understand what kind of change needs to come about. And Patanjali explains it to us, that it is through meditation and meditation only that this permanent change comes about. And that as we are struggling or working with that process, changes occur in the brain cells. They activate, in other words, these centers activate themselves, and the perfection that results from that is what? Felt in the next incarnation. It might not happen in this life that we're going to get the result, but in the next one we will definitely have it. So, this question was asked: who will say that man has already reached that degree of responsibility and harmlessness required for the revelation of the whole truth? So what is given in these books is a very small portion of that secret knowledge. Many gaps exist. They only tell us to relate it to the solar system and to man as he now exists. Neither do we know exactly what happened in the previous eras, but suggestions are given as to what is going to happen to us in the future as well. And hints everywhere telling us where our karma, heaviest karma, was made is also there. Now here's Mr. Judge in his epitome. The constitution of man is subdivided into a septenary manner, the main divisions being those of body, soul, and spirit. These divisions and their relative development govern his subjective condition after death. The real division cannot be understood and must for a time remain esoteric, because it requires certain senses not usually developed for its understanding. If the present sevenfold division as given by theosophical writers is adhered to strictly and without any conditional statement, it will give rise to controversy or error. For instance, the spirit is not a seventh principle. It is the synthesis or the whole, and is equally present in the other six. This is very succinct statement, but it makes the student think. So he's telling us Atma is present in all the others, because it's the substratum that holds everything together. The spiritual comes first, and then it emanates out of itself successively all the others. But nevertheless, it is there. It is invisible, but once it leaves the laya, which is that unconditional mukta condition, it differentiates slowly. Out of itself, it emanates all the others. We had a talk on the brain and its function, and all of the hints from the secret doctrine about the pineal gland was discussed. Now that is very relevant to today's talk, because these subjective conditions or consciousness or planes of being cannot be understood, tells us Mr. Judge, until those centers in our brain are activated. At this stage, we use all of our capabilities, but unknowingly. They function at a specific level, but once they are activated, they obviously are forceful and function at a different level, enabling each one internally to perceive at higher levels of existence, at higher levels of being. And here is stated in the key, HPB. This is about Atma and Buddhi. To make it more conceivable to the human intellect, when first attempting to study of occultism and to solve the ABC of the mystery of man, occultism calls this seventh principle the synthesis of the six and gives it for vehicle the spiritual soul, buddhi. But this is not very understandable because this student has been struggling with it just like anyone else. The spiritual discernment is the vehicle of Atma, which is a spirit. But she says there is a secret involved in this, and it is never given out because it enables those who know to willingly project their double. And for that reason, it is never divulged. She says it is a very dangerous thing to know, and sometimes people die at night because they have left the body and they just don't know how to come back into it. So this is a serious discussion of this particular problem. And she says, if this could be explained, the buddhi principle would be understood a lot better. And I wish it could be explained so that we could understand it better. But then she continues to say, it is very carefully guarded. It's not given. So, that means that Atma and Buddhi are the monadic unit, because Atman cannot express without its vehicle, and Buddhi is its vehicle. So, man and his principles are the key to the universe, and were he know all about himself, he would know all about the macrocosm as well. In addition to being able to use that knowledge through the power of his awakened will, and awakening which parallels the acquisition of real knowledge. Now, information and knowledge is not the same thing. We can gather information, but once we go through the experience and have that internal perception about it, then it converts itself into knowledge. Then we know. In the glossary, HPB tells us about the will. She says, like all the rest, the will is septenary in its degrees of manifestation, emanating from one eternal, abstract, and purely quiescent will, which she calls Atma in Layam. It becomes Buddhi in its Alaya state, which is the one life, descends lower as Mahat, which is Manas in us, and runs down the ladder of degrees until the divine Eros becomes in its lower animal manifestation, erotic desire. So, will and desire at the higher levels obviously is one from this explanation, but as it descends into matter, it becomes less and less spiritual. Now, we men as we are do not know desire at that level, at this stage of our development, because our desires and the lower intellectual mind work together. They have been at it for such a long time, they're hardly separable. So, and Mr. Judge calls this will the force of a spirit in action. The force of a spirit in action. So, we can consider that will the connection between upper and lower principles. And I gave out a handout about will and desire. Do you all have it? Yep. And even though at the higher levels this is one principle, at the lower where we are, it is opposed. And it defines it. It's very explicit. Will is the exclusive possession of man on this our plane of consciousness. It divides him from the brute in whom instinctive desire only is active. This instinctive desire is also active with us, but it is not effective anymore because it's co-joined to kama. Desire in its widest application is the one creative force in the universe. In this sense, it is indistinguishable from will, but we men never know it as it is. Therefore, it is considered opposed. Thus, will is the offspring of the divine, the God in man, desire, the motive power of the animal life. So most men then live by desire, and they mistake it for will. But he who would achieve must separate will from desire and make his will the ruler. For desire is unstable and ever-changing, while will is steady and constant. It gathers strength as it goes. Both will and desire are absolute creators, forming man himself and his surroundings. Will creates intelligently, desire blindly and unconsciously. Therefore, we make ourselves in the image of our desires unless we create ourselves in the likeness of the divine through the will, which is the child of that light within each human heart. His task then is twofold: to awaken the will, to strengthen it by use and conquest, to make it absolute ruler within his body, and parallel with this, to purify his desires. So then, knowledge and will are the tools required for this purification and transformation that we read about in Patanjali's Yoga Authorization. So, will, desire. And this is where our psychic and spiritual nature differentiate. And this is where a lot of theosophical students run into very bad trouble, because they're not able to separate will from the desire. They mistake one for the other, and they fall. And if we look at the movement of the 19th century, we see this happening to a lot of prominent theosophical personalities that were on the scene. This is not brought to our attention so that we can finger point at anybody, not at all. They're simply saying we are still the same natures that existed in that century, and we need to be cautious about it, so that what we do not only affects us, it affects everybody at large, including humanity. If we are here to help humanity move, as the first speaker said, to achieve its natural progression, then we need to align our will with that force, not our personal desires. Now, okay, we talked about the 6th and the 7th principles. This is being 7, this is being 6, and this is the 5th. And it joins here. So, the monad then is the 7th and the 6th principles because they go together. One is the vehicle, the other one is the spirit, and it cannot make itself known but through its vehicle, which is buddhi, which is a spiritual discernment. What about the rest of these principles? In the Sinet's Buddhism, when it first came out, they were listed under some numbers, but HPB corrected that in her writing, saying that depending on which principle is the most developed in that personal in incarnation, that's the one that needs to get the highest number. Because if it is the intellectual, this is designated as the lower mind. The intellectual is the lower mind. What is the higher mind? The divine mind. And this is the key. To understand this principle and to control it is the key. We go up or down from here. This is the antaskarana, the bridge. The higher cannot influence the lower but through this process. To control and understand and to limit our activity to the divine is the key. People ask, how do I do it? How do I do it? This is the process, how it is done. So the will then is what makes that transformation. It cannot act on the lower plane, but it can certainly influence. If we open our inner channels to its influence, it can influence. How did we do that in that previous talk? We talked about the pineal gland. And there is an article, and it is succinctly distinct about the psychic and the noetic in man. This is an original HPB article. It is recommended that we all read it for ourselves because it's long, but it clearly defines the psychic nature and the spiritual nature. The spiritual nature is this one up here, and the will is its motion power, right? We just defined it in Epitome of Theosophy by Mr. Judd. So that is the spiritual aspect in all of us. But the pineal gland is not active. She calls it petrified in the Secret Doctrine. It's not my word. These are hers. Petrified. She says, this is the organ where the highest seat of spirituality is. Highest seat of spirituality. So we need to give ourselves this opportunity to activate it, activate this force in ourselves, the pineal gland. So she says, in some men it is the higher intelligence, which is the divine mind, the fifth, which dominates the rest. In others, the animal soul, Kamarupa, that reigns supreme, exhibiting the most bestial instincts, animalistic in other words. The force of a spirit in action or will has, generally speaking, two aspects: the higher spiritual aspect and the lower psychic aspect. And the principles arrange or organize themselves under that aspect which happens to predominate in the individual at the time. Is that the real time?
Yeah.
Should I quit?
No, we got started late.
We got started a little late.
We got started late.
Okay.
A lot late.
So, here is the key. This is a very definite statement. There's no qualms about it. She defines it. If your intellectual mind is in ascendancy, that's your psychic energy. You're not a spiritual. Don't pretend to be spiritual. You need to get a hold of it, control it, learn from it, but don't say it's your spiritual aspect, because it isn't. Until the divine higher mind is in control, and obviously pineal gland has a lot to do with it, we are at the mercy of this desire principle. And we confuse it with the higher aspect and call it will. And this is where the problem comes from. In the Key to Theosophy, she discusses excuse me, prayer. And it might be profitable for everyone to read it. She says, ordinary prayer, which is extended externally, has absolutely no value. We might, she says, as well pray to the absolute. It has no interest in listening to us. It is not cognizant of our prayer. But what she says we can do is will prayer. Will prayer. And through this, transmute. Will prayer. And she says, this will prayer, most decidedly we call it will prayer, and it is rather an internal command than a petition. Look at the sentence again. We call it will prayer, and it is rather an internal command than a petition. Will prayer is addressed to our Father, which is in secret, or that deific essence of which we are cognizant within us in our heart and in our spiritual consciousness only. Connected. They're all connected to one another, right? Pineal gland is the organ in the physical body, but once activated, it aligns itself obviously with these other forces in the human body. These are chemical processes as well as spiritual processes, right? Because the physical body works with the chemical processes as well as with the others. Why is that? She says the cells made up of atoms constitute a world of their own. This is very interesting. The atom is a world of its own. They are psycho-spiritual. The atoms, can I take it off? The atoms are psycho-spiritual. They're not physical. Not physical. We can visualize it, but they're not physical cells. They don't have their existence on Earth, in other words. No one has been able to locate them. They have an idea where the electronic positives and the ions align themselves, but no one has ever seen one. They don't belong to this level of consciousness. They are psycho-spiritual. And here's the key. She says, as we think, so we are. It's the thought that has the influence here. If my thought comes from the higher Atma-Buddhic center, its expression then is the higher mind through the physical, which is the pineal gland. But if it is Kama Manas, the intellectual mind, influencing the cells, because they address both, right? Psychic is kamic, the spiritual is atmic, but they respond to both. It can go up and it can go down, the cell, through the atoms, right? So they're not physical. So if I'm giving it psychic energy, that's what the influence is. If I'm giving it the spiritual, that's what is in ascendancy. At that time, whatever it is that I'm doing, my action then is based on my thought, and that carries up and down as to which way it is going to go. So, she says here, for those students who have had a Christian background, it is imperative to remember that even though we address these principles as separate, that they're united. 1 in 3, 3 in 1 is how she expresses it in the Secret Doctrine. And here's the key. The Christos principle in man. Some call it the sixth principle, Buddhi, others the seventh, Atman. If Christian Theosophists wish to make use of such expression, let them be made philosophically correct by following the analogy of the old wisdom religion symbols. We say that Christos is not only one of the three higher, but all three regarded as a trinity. This trinity represents the Holy Ghost, the Father, and the Son, as it answers to abstract a spirit, differentiated a spirit, and embodied a spirit. Abstract a spirit, differentiated a spirit, and embodied a spirit. Okay. Absolute. Unmanifested. Logos. So what would that be? Abstract spirit. It is not differentiated. It is as is, whether it is at rest or in Mahamanvantara. This is the beginning of activity, but it is abstract, undifferentiated. Then comes the second logos. Manifested. This is highly metaphysical, by the way.
Is that the dot?
Sorry?
Is that the dot?
That's the dot. Manifested logos. That energy is now concentrating as a spiritual light, and it's going to bring about all this change. And then this Atma Buddhi Manas, which is embodied, which is in us. Embodied spirit. We don't see it, but it's there. Third logos is, in the secret doctrine, defined as man, Mahat. We are mind beings. Man, Manu, Mahat. So the mind, whether it is in a body or outside of it, exists. It's called Chitta. That's the field of the mind, Chitta. So she says here, Krishna and Christ are philosophically the same principle under its triple aspect of manifestation. In the Gita, Krishna calling himself indifferently Atman, the abstract spirit, Kshetrajna, the higher or reincarnating ego, the Atma Buddhi Manasic combination, and the universal self, the one life, all names which, when transferred from the universe to man, answer to Atma Buddhi Manas. So, what's out there is in us. And this is how we reconcile it. Abstract, manifested, embodied. It's very important to understand it. Will prayer is defined as an occult process by which finite and conditioned thoughts and desires, unable to be assimilated by the Absolute Spirit, which is unconditioned, are translated into spiritual wills, and the will, such process being called a spiritual transmutation. Well, isn't that wonderful a statement? This is how it is done. The intensity of our ardent aspirations changes prayer into the philosopher's stone, or that which transmutes lead into gold. The only homogeneous essence, our will prayer, becomes the active or creative force producing effects according to our desires. This is going to require thinking about. It's not a one-time thing that we can understand, but it is wonderful that they give the key in this one here.
Could you go over that again? Could you read that sheet again?
Yes. We said from here, the uncreate power, the abstract spirit, is there. Unmanifested or absolute. She calls it the first logos in the secret doctrine. But then, that once that point is put in that circle, it becomes manifested, because the pralaya has ended. Now we are moving into manvantara, which is going to be activity. That also exists in us. But besides that, there is the third, which is Atma Buddhi Manas, which is called here, what did we call it? Embodied spirit. So, abstract, manifested, embodied. And all three exist in us. But because that principle cannot directly influence matter, because it's not, it's a spiritual, it follows this process described here, how that transmutation comes about. The intensity of our ardent aspirations changes prayer into the philosopher's stone, or that which transmute lead into pure gold. The only homogeneous essence, Atma Buddhi, right? Homogeneous essence, our will prayer becomes the active or creative force producing effects according to our desire. To the question, do you mean to say that prayer is an occult process bringing about physical results? The answer made is, I do. Willpower becomes a living power. And this is the key to Theosophy, that we take it, we assimilate it, and we make it a living power in ourselves. A living power. And this living power then is that willpower that we say we're going to do this transmutation with. We use the spiritual aspect to transmute the lower aspects in us. But woe, she says, to those occultists and theosophists who, instead of crushing out the desires of the lower personal ego or physical man, and saying, addressing their higher spiritual ego, immersed in Atma Buddhic light, thy will be done, not mine, send up waves of willpower for selfish or unholy purposes. This is black magic, abomination, and spiritual sorcery. So obviously, once this power becomes active, it can work both ways, is what this tells me. So, the marks of the septenary man then is within the physical body, no doubt about it. Everything exists there. But what we do with it is very, very important. And she says here that the protean double, the astral, where our emotions and desires are located, is affected by the spleen the most. I said the pineal for the other one. We must put a few here for the lower. Liver. Chemic organs in the body are those. They retain the impressions of our personal stuff in those.
Spleen, stomach, and liver?
Yes. So, those are our chemic organs, and we need to be aware of it, that whatever impressions we create, they are retained. Because she says each cell has a memory of its own kind. A memory of its own kind. So it retains the impressions that we create in them. So, these are our chemic organs, and the pineal gland is our spiritual organ. Okay, let's see how we can sum it up. And she says, the seat of the above-mentioned desires, nor yet does he know, meaning science, anything of the pineal gland, which he describes as a horny gland with a little sand in it, which gland is in truth the very seat of the highest and divinest consciousness in man, his omniscient, spiritual, and all-embracing mind. So our divine mind then forms that upper three. So, And there's a whole lot, but I think I need to bring it to an end. She says the pineal gland, or the pine-formed heart, the secret heart of occultism, corresponds to Mount Meru in the writings, and Patala refers to these. It's the South Pole. The North Pole, spiritual; South Pole, physical. So, let's see what else. So, the higher ego, she says, cannot act directly on the body, as its consciousness belongs to quite another plane and planes of ideation. The lower self does, and its action and behavior depend on its free will and choice as to whether it will gravitate more towards its parent, the Father in heaven, or the animal which informs, the man of flesh. The higher ego, as part of the essence of the universal mind, is unconditionally omniscient on its own plane, and only potentially so in our terrestrial sphere, as it has to act solely through its alter ego, the personal self. Thank you. I will open it to question.
Some of the questions I had were related to things that you took off the board, and I
Well,
did,
you can ask it. I will
and
still
I
answer
did,
it.
and I didn't write it down, so
Oh,
it may be a little
sorry.
harder to recall. But the one of the major things I did focus on was this will prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I've gathered from what you said is that the will prayer is the power to bring about transformation through a energy that derives from spirit, that is a prayer that's not asking for something but commanding something.
Of your own Father in heaven.
In heaven.
Yes, the heaven being the heart.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
because that will energy is the volition of the higher ego in you, and that volition can be brought about for spiritual purposes only. That is why everywhere ethics, unity, impersonality is impressed on us in these teachings. It moves you in that direction. You're not concerned about the lower self. You're concerned about the benefiting of all. And that is not a statement. It's a way of living internally. You look on the outside as the rest, but on the inside, you're living a spiritual divine life because you're attuned to your higher aspects a lot more than the lower. But at the beginning, this is a conscious effort to move in that direction. But once it becomes natural, obviously it has impetus of its own, and it guides you in that direction too, right? You attract it, it attracts you.
and the danger that we are warned of
Yes.
in trying to exercise our higher self,
Higher will, yeah.
higher will, is that we get confused or delusioned into thinking that our desires, our lower desires, are really our will.
Exactly. That we are doing it for the benefit of the all, when in fact all we are interested is our own welfare. And we mistake it whenever there is the slightest tinge, slightest tinge of personal This is selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And it is material. This higher has nothing to do with these. It's this that has everything to do with it. And this is where students confuse as to what process they are doing, and they try to enforce this lower aspect onto others, saying, for instance, I'm doing it for the benefit of everybody here in this room. But does the action taken show such a result?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I after power, influence, position, title? A lot of people camouflage all this stuff. You know, we are the product of the environment. And Mr. Judge warns us all the time that even though these might not be full-fledged in us,
mm-hmm.
in germ, it exists
mm-hmm.
in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that if we give it the right environment, it flourishes and opens up like a blooming, beautiful flower. And it corrodes. Because your conviction then is that you're on the right path. And we're warned many, many places that before those students have prepared themselves to take the first step and put it on the path, they think they have arrived. And so we come down, we fall. It's just inevitable. It's not sustainable. The spirit sustains the spiritual aspects of us. That higher will, where does it come from? Where is that Kamadiva we talked about? We gave a talk on this subject too, Kamadiva. The desire first arose in it. So it is at the core of the universe. But its concern is for everything and all equally.
Mm-hmm.
It is under a strict justice that karma, that law works, because it's beneficent to everything and everyone. It doesn't say I'm going to shine over here and I'm not going to shine over here. The sun shines everywhere. It's equivalent. It's in its direction. It shines on everything and everyone. It's human nature that is selfish, personal, and material that takes it and changes its orientation and makes it personal to themselves. We make it personal to each one. That's why they say when you deal with the situation around you, don't make it personal to yourself. It is a very difficult task not to. But we are to try not to make it personal to ourselves. If you make it impersonal, you're a here. This is impersonal, impartite, universal. This one is personal, selfish, and concentrated on itself. All for me, none for you. That's where that is. But the other is, let me do more for you before I do some for me. Then you're here. This is not unspecific. It's very specific, their recommendations.
So are you saying that that when our actions are influenced by our selfish desires, that's our psychic nature?
That's your karmic nature, which is psychic. Yes.
Which is psychic. That's a
Yep.
common nature.
Karmic. Kama manas is your
Are we saying
desires.
karma? Are you saying K-A-R or K-M-A?
K-A-M-A. Kama.
All right.
Those are your desires. They're personalized, and it works with the intellectual mind. And we are warned that there are giant intellectuals in the world, but they have absolutely no spirituality. Scientific world is based on that giant intellect.
Question.
Yes.
How do we connect to our Atma Buddhi without the desire to do so? Maybe I didn't say that right. How do we connect? Okay, what is? All right, don't we use the intellect to connect to the higher,
Yes.
the higher. We have to use the intellect to connect to the Buddhi Atma.
Yes, but that's your divine mind. There is a bridge. Here is mind, okay? And here's this path. Or you can do it this way too. And put it here. Here's the path. This is the Antaskarana bridge. This consciousness, Atma Buddhi Manas, is not of earth. It's a spiritual. It's omniscient on its own plane.
Yes.
Not here, not on the physical.
Yes.
But the lower mind is here. It's your brain power in conjunction with either up or low. Okay, if your thinking is with your personal nature, kamamanas, intellectual mind with personal desires, it pulls you to earth. Bestial instincts, she says. That's your psychic nature. We have it. We have to learn to deal with it. It's going to develop in all of us. But if your thinking is altruistic, and there is a tint of altruism in all of us, when you feel compassion for the suffering of the other, when you see a dog abused, that's compassion. If you feel for the dog, or the bird falls and its wing is broken and you lift it up, oh, you little poor thing, what can I do to repair your wing? That's compassion. It comes from here. You know which way you're going, okay? Or if you see the dog and you go kick it and flies off and you have damaged it, you're coming from here. You're selfish and personal and you don't care for anything else but yourself. It shows in all of our behavior, all of our behavior. So depending how your mind is working and from which principle you're working, you can definitely decide. Sometimes things come into the mind and you can say, you know what, that is not the way I want to think. And you can refuse to accept it. The chitta, the plane of the mind, is a plane of the mind. You attract things to yourself that are similar in nature to yourself. And to the capacity that you have developed, that you can access in that mind, everything is there. All our problems are solvable because they exist in the mind field, chitta. So you can tell, definitely you can tell. So if your willpower, the prayer we're talking about, the will prayer, that's the volition of this monadic essence, volition. It goes out like lightning and it cuts all difficulty asunder. That's not a word. Once you reach this stage where you can apply your will, it goes out and cuts all difficulty asunder. But your aim, purpose, intent is spiritual. It doesn't work any other way. Or she said you become the sacrificial lamb yourself. You cannot send a spiritual request or what did she call it, command to your higher self unless it is in that direction. It works for the good of all. But if it is personal, it has become psychic energy and its effect is going to fall on you. Under karma, it comes back to you. It's double edged. They tell you that this road, let me read it. This is beautiful. It's a beautiful article, this. This bridge, she says, must be kept open without toll for every traveler longing to cross the treacherous waters of the lower psychic ocean in order to reach to the other shore where reign those beings who have become blessed co-workers in nature's harmonious processes. Where are we going with this philosophy? This is also an antaskarana, the bridge. The masters have weaved a bridge through their philosophy so that in some life, through this work, we can find them also. Without their help, there is no possibility of perfection either. We can only go so much and no further. That's also reality. They exist. They're all around us, everywhere. We have to learn to feel them, to perceive them on the inner lines of our being, and attune our own energy to their effort, because they're our benefactors. They are the benefactors and elder brothers of humanity. They want us to cross this to the other shore. So if we understand truly what HPB's mission was, we would stay with the real teachings. There's just no doubt about it that she came as a beneficent force to enable those few who wish to cross to be able to do so.
The Chitta is the plane of the mind?
Yes. Yes, it is. And this is what you do in meditation. You're trying to calm the lower mind, your personal, because it's normally agitated, you know. All things kind of force themselves in. But once you are under the influence of that divine mind, it goes quiet. And then a different field work opens up before you.
One final question.
Yes.
And it may be a question and a statement, but
Okay.
is it safe to say that looking at this division
Yes.
of man and his life, that the quest or the journey is to achieve a level of consciousness, to achieve a consciousness on the higher levels of the self, which you've described as the Atma Buddhi Manas, real permanent self. To have that level of consciousness for the human being is what the journey is about. So that if the human being reaches the level of consciousness of Atma Buddhi Manas, then this is the question: does that attainment put you on an equal level with the ultimate, or the does that put you on the same level of the second logos? In other words, when you reach a level of consciousness, the human being reaches a level of where that human being has a level of consciousness that is all Atma Buddhi Manas.
Well, where's the voice?
Okay.
Let's read it. There you go. Yea, on the Arya path thou art no more Soratapati, thou art a bodhisattva. What is a bodhisattva? A savior of men. The stream is crossed. It is true, thou hast a right to Dharmakaya vesture, but Sambhogakaya is greater than a Nirvani, and greater still is a Nirmanakaya, the Buddha of compassion. Those three choices are yours when you reach that level. Now bend thy head and listen well, O Bodhisattva. Compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? shalt thou be saved, and hear the whole world cry. Now thou hast heard that which was said, thou shalt attain the 7th step and cross the gate of final knowledge, but only to walk, if thou wouldst be Tathagata, Buddha. Follow upon the predecessor's steps, remain unselfish till the endless end. Thou art enlightened, choose thy way. So obviously this is a progressive enlightenment, that it is not a one-step road, but more than one-step road. But at certain junction points, obviously, when the human soul has joined the alaya, the universal, and knows all that there has to be known, because it has become part of all, we are still given a choice. Behold, the mellow light that floods the eastern sky, in signs of praise both heaven and earth unite, and from the fourfold manifested powers a chant of love ariseth, both from the flaming fire and flowing water, and from sweet smelling earth and rushing wind. Hark! From the deep, unfathomable vortex of that golden light in which the victor bathes, all nature's wordless voice in 1,000 tones ariseth to proclaim, joy unto ye, O men of Mialba. Mialba is earth. A pilgrim hath returned back from the other shore. A new Arhan is born. Arhan is a savior, a Mahatma, a perfected being. Peace to all beings. So this is what you have just described, but it also has the steps in it, that you can cross it and not look back. Then you become a Pratyeka Buddha, which is selfishness, because you're not concerned about humanity that remains. But if you become a Nirmanakaya, you remain in your invisible vesture that you have weaved for yourself, and remain in the atmosphere of earth to help all those in need. So you have choices even at that stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We regroup at 1917 Walnut Street. That's the ULT Philadelphia, Saturday, May 3, and next Sunday in this room to continue our work in the Washington area. Thank you.